Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew Does Hair. You can find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. I recently asked my Instagram followers what they'd like to hear me talk about. I guess I was just kind of out of ideas for these videos. And I got an overwhelming response for, we want to hear about head shapes and face shapes and suitable haircuts for different head shapes. Truth be told, I've never talked about this before. I've thought about it a lot, but in kind of a non-verbal way. It's pictures, it's angles. And so sitting down to kind of put bullet points together for this, to put it into words, was a lot of fun. And hopefully it can kind of help you out there, whether you're a barber or stylist or a consumer, to kind of understand your head shape and what might fit it. So my own take on the whole head shape, face shape, haircut discussion isn't quite as cut and dry as what I tend to see out there online. I don't think it's necessarily like, hey, if you have this head shape, get this haircut. I don't really think about it that way. There are a handful of cases where it's like, yo, if your head's like this, you can't do that. But we'll get into that near the end of the video after we explain kind of a lot of things. But truth be told, I kind of think almost any head can kind of do almost any haircut. It just has to be tailored appropriately to that head. And this is all about head shape. Now, to some people, a haircut is, just cut it to like 2 inches on top. And to some people, a haircut is just cut 2 inches off the bottom. But to some people, haircutting isn't lengths and numbers. Haircutting is building a structure out of thousands of hairs, a flexible structure that moves, that sits on top of your ball of flesh here that you call your head and emphasizes certain aesthetic features. And when you look at haircutting that way, there's only one ruler. The ruler is your head. If we were to look at, I don't know, say like a fun little bob, you just kind of look at what a bob generally does. It takes this natural curve along the back of the head here, and it echoes it, but it also exaggerates it. It kind of makes it bigger and bolder. If you got a tight little clean bob with stacks and layers and graduation in the back, that's essentially what you're doing, is you're taking this natural shape of the head and you're making it a little bigger, a little bolder. And then at the same time, you're running this bold line somewhere off of the bob to follow the jawline and emphasize the chin and the jaw shape. So there's our little bob there. Don't call it a Karen haircut, you're not clever. But if we're looking at a short bob, that's what kind of builds it, is you're emphasizing the natural shape of the back of the head. That's a nice attractive curve that we like, and you're just making it bigger and bolder, and at the same time you're also boldening up and emphasizing the jawline and the chin shape. Now the length required to do that is going to be different for every head, depending on how big your head is, how steep this bone is, depending on all of the different structures of your being. Now for the rest of this video, I'm going to focus on like traditionally masculine haircuts because that's what a large majority of my following tends to be interested in. Somewhere along the way, like maybe, I don't know, 100 years ago, 70 years ago, 150 years ago, somewhere along the way, somebody decided that like a men's haircut should be square. If I were to take a guess, I would say this has to do something maybe with the fact that people who have higher testosterone levels tend to have squarer features. And so somebody was like, you know what, if you can make the haircut, make the head look squarer, that's really manly. And so I don't know the actual origins of it, but it's just been like every classic men's haircut that you see is essentially a square. And I mean, we are pulling hair up and cutting it to a square shape. We're pulling hair out and cutting it to a square shape. Like that right there is basically every traditional men's haircut. Whether you get a flat top, okay, obviously a square, a flat top is square. A quiff is like a flat top that's maybe a little taller in the front. A pompadour is maybe even a little bit taller in the front, but it still has that same square shape to it. Side part, undercut, slick back, like all of these classic men's haircuts are different variations of putting a square, a box, around a round shape. And this is not just from this angle, it's traditionally you put a box here as well. So this squareness thing actually is very functional as well. Typically a haircut with squarer corners tends to move really interestingly, having that extra length in the corners there, but also they tend to grow back really nicely as well. If you have a very short haircut and you cut the hair to a round shape, something like this, that doesn't grow back very nicely. So the square thing is somewhat functional, actually quite very functional. But at the end of the day, just know this, with every like classic men's haircut, one of the big goals is we are just taking a round head, a round ball of flesh, and we're building corners for it out of hair. So if the goal is to add corners, squareness to a round shape, the first thing you want to consider is the hair texture and the growth patterns. If you've got hair that's pretty coarse and pretty straight and sticks straight out, you might actually literally cut it to a square. However, let's say you've got really fine hair and it bends a lot and it takes some effort to get it to stick out. If you want to create this kind of square silhouette here with the haircut, you might need to leave it considerably longer, pull it way out to here, and cut it something like that, so that when each hair bends and falls, it'll actually create a shape that fills this sort of red silhouette here. I hope you can see the red in that camera. Sometimes it takes not a square, like a hard diagonal like this, in order to create a square. If the hair is too flexible or too fine, you might need to have the hair pile up on itself to then build this square shape. And so I would actually say that hair texture is a lot more limiting as far as what you can and can't do with your hair than head shape is. Head shape's not a big problem. Like I said, almost any haircut can be tailored to fit onto almost any head. There's only a few very small exceptions where I would say no-go, but your hair texture is going to limit you long before your head shape does. So now that we know what a haircut is, we're adding these square corners to a round shape. Let's get back to talking about different head shapes and how all of this varies based on the head shape. If you take a comb and you lay it flat on the side of your head and kind of rock it around, you could find a point at which your head is the widest. We call this your parietal ridge. Same thing with this guy. If I rock this comb here, I can find the widest point on his head. If you were to do the same thing on the back of your head, you would find your occipital bone, which is also the widest point on your head. It's back here. Parietal ridge typically is shaped something like this. It kind of dips down at the temple, comes up on the side, and then it comes right back down and meets the parietal ridge. I'm sure we've all recognized that kind of curved shape from like a drop fade or just various haircuts. They're so, like, a good haircut is built off of that shape because that's the shape of the head. So this is your parietal ridge. And on some people, the parietal ridge, like on myself, is on the high side. My parietal ridge is like way up here. I got like 3-4 inches of head until my ear is down there. And on other people, the parietal ridge is on the low side. Like if they have like a particularly round head, it's typically a lower parietal ridge. Now this parietal ridge is really, really important because being the widest point of the head, it tells us where our square should sit, whether we're doing a very short haircut or a very long haircut. When we're going to build those corners out there, we want to make sure that they kind of are built off of that parietal ridge. For example, if I take a little square corner here and I build it off up here above the parietal ridge, if that's the shape of my haircut and my head is protruding out on the side there, it's going to have somewhat of a jar head feel to it. And at times, if you have like a rounder head and you fade up over that parietal ridge, it's going to look even rounder because this is just going to look like bulbous out here, sticking out wider than your haircut. So you definitely don't want your haircut, your corner, to sit above that parietal ridge. Now at the same time, if you're building a corner off of below the parietal ridge, like if the haircut actually came out to that shape and was built up off of too low, you get that kind of light bulb shape and you look like Jersey Shore. And so ideally, you find that wide point and you build your square off of it. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll feel the angle of the bottom of the head and I'll look right in the mirror and I'll go, okay, that's my angle. But you know, if they want a longer haircut, I'll do it here, kind of bring it out away from the head. But your head tells me what angle your hair should be cut, theoretically, for the most part. It's a guideline. It's a place to start. So if I want to build a square on this head, I want to build it right off of that parietal ridge. So these heads that I've got on the board here, they're pretty generically shaped. They're just like a normal person's head. If I wanted to build a square out here for whatever haircut, say I was building, if that's the design that I wanted, and I've got to bring this hair from the corner like straight out here, it's not very straight. I could get away with whatever that is, 1.5 inches of hair right there to fill in this void to make sure I'm squaring off my round shape. Now this is on a generic average head shape. Let's just say that this guy had a round head. Let's say his parietal ridge was much lower, and this curvature right here, the curvature on the top of the head here, let me see if I can find my comb to show you this. And I sit and I do this to clients, I rock my comb around them. If this curvature right here is on the larger side and your parietal ridge is kind of low, you've got a round head shape, probably. I'm horrible at drawing, but let's see if I can do this. I don't need you for a minute. So let's say this circle here is a round head. If this is a perfectly shaped head and a round head is like way bigger, you're going to need a lot more length to come out here and create this square shape on the outside of the head. You'll need more length here than you would need on an average head if you have a big round head. So typically when I get clients who actually have round faces or round heads, there's a sense, oftentimes they know they have like a big round head. And so they go, I want like a really tight little haircut because I'm worried if I have big hair, my head will look bigger. And this is actually the opposite approach you want to take. If you have a big head, you need big hair to fit it. It reminds me of, you know, when I stopped being 22 and lean, but I still wanted to wear skinny pants and tight little clothes and stuff. I remember buying jackets that were too small for me, thinking like, oh, I could still fit into a medium, and thinking that my tight leather jacket made me look slim because it was like a tight leather jacket. But really, like, I looked at pictures and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to buy a bigger size. And so when you have a round head and you try to keep the corners of the haircut too tight, too close to the head, you're basically cramming an overweight guy into a small jacket. If you have a big head, you need a big haircut to fit it. And I know, like, you might feel like, well, I know my head's big, so my hair, it can't be any bigger. But think of it this way. If you have if you have a big round corner here and your parietal ridge is very prominent and you've got these like big bones around your big round bony head, it's because of those features that you can pull off big hair. You're the person big hair was made for. When you see these little pinhead Ryan Cabrera guys with giant hair and nothing else about them is giant, it looks silly. If anybody needs giant hair, it's the guy with the giant head. Because if you want these hairs to connect the way that they should to fit your head, if your head is big, your hair has to be big. Now, if you happen to have a kind of high parietal ridge and the sides of your head are somewhat vertical, like see mine mine are hollow. I'll get into that in a minute. But if you have like vertical sides of your head and a very high parietal ridge with a very tight radius around the top, there's a good chance you have a square-shaped head. Now, just like on the average size head, if we want to create this shape, we need that much length. If I want to create the same shape on the square head, I don't need as much length on the corner to create this same silhouette out here because the head itself is fulfilling part of that job. The head itself is square. And so I don't need a ton of length to create a square shape. It's for this reason, if I was ever to pick somebody who's like, hey, you'll look really good with the highest, tightest fade ever, it's a square head shape because you don't need to build a square on the top of their head because they already have one. And so you can just take the hair like off and it still looks good. But if I tried to do that on a round head, if I took the hair all the way up over the round of that head and I took that fade as high as possible, it's going to look like Bert and Ernie, or whichever one of them has the wider head. That same little length that works on the square head doesn't work on the round head because it doesn't build our square. Another kind of side note about square heads, if you ever look at like Ryan Reynolds' haircut, I forget, he did some action movie or something, he had a very short haircut, but what was unique about it is it had very round corners. His hairdresser broke a classic rule and went with a round haircut on a very macho guy. And that's what I think is cool about that haircut. But typically if you have a very square head, and I don't know if Ryan Reynolds has a square head, it's kind of hard to tell looking at the photos because whatever, but if you have a very square head, you can absolutely round the corners more than you could on somebody else and it'll work and it'll look good because the head itself is square. If you have a very high parietal ridge and maybe a tighter radius on the top there, but you find that whether due to prominent cheekbones or just kind of hollow temples, like I actually have very hollow temples, my head's like in and then out here, you might have kind of a diamond-shaped head. Or if you want to be harsh with yourself, an egg shape. With a head like that, of course you can do any haircut you want to do, except I probably wouldn't do a high fade. That's my really wonky diamond-shaped head there. Obviously over-exaggerated, just to stress the point here. So if on an ideal shaped head, I need an inch or two on the corners there. If somebody's head is very narrow at the top, like mine is, you need a lot of length out here, a ton of length at the top to create a square shape. So typically when I get clients who have diamond-shaped heads or egg-shaped heads, I never ever want to give them a high fade, because then you absolutely look like Bert and Ernie. You leave the top long, you get this sprout here, this pineapple situation going on. If you've got a narrow head or a diamond-shaped head, you need to fill in that square. And so typically on those kinds of heads, that's when I really strongly encourage, like, let's do the lowest fade. Like, oh, you want to fade? You want to look like David Beckham or whatever? Okay, let's give you the lowest fade possible. And at times they go, but I don't want a low fade. I'm like, look at the shape of your head, man. You need a low fade. So this is one of the situations when I was saying, if you got this head shape, just don't even do that. Like if your head's narrow at the top, don't do a high fade. So some of my clients who have this kind of head shape, when we give them a fade, I mean, I literally like right in front, right just above the ear, I'll like tap it with the clipper, and then we just build this shape up, you know, this way, like as close as possible. But if someone's got this diamond shaped head and I cut this top hair that long because they want the highest, tightest fade, and I connect it down to the bald down here, like that's going to be the shape of their haircut. And that is not square, and that is not nice. That is Bert and Ernie. Okay, so leaving aside face shapes, and I guess right behind the face shapes, let's talk about another aspect of the head shape, which is the occipital bone. And this one's crazy, crazy important. That again is this big bulbous bone on the back of your head. Or on some people it's bulbous, on some people it's very flat. This is an attractive curve. We like this. Oftentimes when my clients kind of have flatter occipital bones, oftentimes they're aware of it, and oftentimes they don't like it or they're insecure about it. And a lot of times they're not even aware that a haircut can fix it. So if I have a client who has a very prominent occipital bone, at times I'll design a haircut that maybe has like less of a steep angle here to kind of diminish how much it looks like it sticks out. But at the same time, if I get a client who has like no occipital bone, I can actually build an occipital bone out of hair. If I change the angle here and leave a little more length up there, this hair can actually pile up down there and create the illusion of having an occipital bone. So you'll see a little video strip that this is like several years old. I recorded on Instagram. This guy had like no occipital bone, and we kind of built one out of hair. If I press my comb into his hair, you'll see there's no bone under there. But when I release it, you can kind of see that shape, that like it looks like you got a bone there. And so what we're able to do here with the occipital bone, and I feel like this is a little bit more clear to people working on the back of the head. Like I feel like people tend to get that more than they get the sides thing, but it's all the same. All we're doing with a haircut, whether it's a bob or a flat top or a men's haircut, women's haircut, whatever, any shorter haircut, essentially what we're doing is we're picking features on the head and we're either building them up and making them look more prominent, or we're building stuff around them to make them look less prominent. We're changing and tweaking these little angles to take whatever head shape you have and make it look like more appealing based on, I don't even know what it's based on, a little bit of personal taste probably, and a little bit of some unwritten rule somewhere that somebody decided like, hey, this is what attractive looks like. But the point being, at the end of the day, that's all we're doing, is we're adding corners or reducing corners to emphasize this feature or diminish that feature. And the best way to do this is to just go to somebody who has a lot of experience. Whether you're a barber or hairdresser watching this and you want to learn more about this, talk to somebody who's been doing hair a lot longer than you, and you kind of know this stuff without knowing that you know it. Like I said earlier, I've never spoken about this before, but I think about it visually, mentally, and so much of it is muscle memory. I'll feel the head while I'm cutting it, and I can just tell based on the way the head feels what angles should be cut there. And then, you know, as a consumer, if you're like, dude, I want somebody to cut my hair to my head shape, don't go to somebody who's been cutting hair 2 years. No offense to anybody. If it's that important to you, go to the busiest specialist you can find who cuts short hair, and they'll absolutely know this stuff. That's how they got busy. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was informative and helpful. Please like and subscribe if you liked it.